Hello and welcome. Let's start with East Africa, where two neighboring nations are teaming up to counter the impact of Trump tariffs. That's Kenya and Uganda. Kenya faces a 10% tariff, and Uganda faces a slightly higher rate of 15%. The tariffs have gone into effect, but instead of retaliating, slamming, or condemning on the outside, the two neighbors have decided to look inwards and to boost trade ties to counter the tariff effect. Kenya and Uganda have agreed to eliminate all existing tariff and non-tariff barriers, hindering bilateral trade. They have also agreed to align all trade-related commitments with the East African Community Treaty and protocols. Now, the two countries have pledged to clear congestion of trucks at key cross-border points, including the Malaba, Busia, Suam, and the Lukawakwa, and this to ensure the smooth flow of goods, services, and people. And next on the list is removing discriminatory excise duties, levies, and other charges of equivalent effect. Another big step is reclassifying the items originating in Kenya and Uganda as transfers rather than imports. Now, this move eliminates tariffs and lowers the cost of doing business. The two sides also agreed to complete the construction of the Kenyan side of the Suam one-stop border post, to upgrade road infrastructure, and to acquire a scanner for the Kenyan side of the Lukawakwa border point. Now, Kenya and Uganda also agreed to set up a joint technical committee to track progress and to settle trade-related issues. Now, back in July, the leaders of the two countries had directed their trade ministers to urgently resolve the existing trade barriers, and it has now resulted in this major bilateral agreement. Uganda is already Kenya's single largest commercial partner and the most frequent user of the Mombasa port. While the two East African neighbors have teamed up to deal with the US tariffs, individually, they are leaving no stone unturned to please the US president. Now, this also to escape his wrath. The Ruto government has signed a pricey lobbying deal to appease Trump, and Kenya's major non-NATO ally status is already under US scrutiny. Uganda, on the other hand, has agreed to accept migrants deported from the US, despite global backlash and controversy around it. As tough times call for tough measures, Kenya and Uganda have taken a different track to minimize the effect of Trump tariffs. The two East African neighbors are trying to counter external pressure by boosting bilateral bonding. Now it remains to be seen if this move will produce the desired results. And for more on this, we have with us Dr. Reginald Kadzutu, a lecturer at Oxford Brookes University, joining us live from Oxford, UK. Welcome to Firstpost Africa.
Thank you.
Now, what immediate risks do the Trump tariffs pose for African economies? And could they accelerate a push for stronger intra-African trade under frameworks like the AfCFTA?
If you were to look at the tariffs to the continent, specifically Kenya and Uganda, and rightly mentioned 10% and 15%, most of the trade that happens between the US and especially Kenya is normally under the AGOA framework, where most of their textiles and apparels go through duty-free. And this is coming up for renewal in September. So the main risk is that if AGOA is not renewed by Trump in September 2025, then these tariffs now will have a real impact on countries like Kenya and Uganda. And the impact comes in that they are not the sole providers of the goods that they trade in to the US for. So that means all of a sudden your goods are 10% higher. if the competition are not hit by the same tariff. So for example, if we look at textiles and we look at the South Asian countries that the largest exporters of textiles to the US, and if they are able to negotiate lower tariffs, then your textiles become more expensive. So the immediate risk for them, I think all the lobbying that needs to be done is to actually make sure that AGOA continues post-September 2025. Then the major exports to the US, like textiles, macadamia nuts and stuff like that, will continue duty-free, and that the tariffs will not affect them.
Now, Uganda is Kenya's single largest commercial partner. How significant is this deepening partnership in insulating the two countries from the global trade shocks? And could it set an example for other African neighbors?
Not that much. Reclassifying from transfers to imports or imports to transfers all depends on policy at that point in time. So for example, if not a year or two ago, Ugandan milk to Kenya was reclassified from a transfer to import. That means Kenyan government started earning revenue on that. So there's a lot of protectionism that comes, especially in the East African community, when one feels like the other is getting an advantage in a product which they also produce. So we shouldn't read much into the reclassification. It's mostly on revenue surplus side of issues. Will Uganda or Kenya in this case cover the gap that if they decide they're not going to export to the US or the US market is impacted, can Uganda cover that gap for Kenya? The answer to that is no. Differentials in income per capita, differentials in tastes, differentials in products that are exported to the two different countries. So for example, one of the largest Kenya's export to the US is vaccines and blood and cultures, which I don't think Uganda will be wanting to import that much of vaccines, blood and cultures, close to $174 million. So I don't think this will help them for that, but it is a good thing if they start reducing tariffs on inter-regional trade or the non-tariff barriers as one of the key things that actually affect intra-Africa trade. Apart from infrastructure and all, non-tariff barriers are actually the largest impediment to inter-regional Africa trade.
Yeah. Right, Dr. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa.
Thank you.
Firstpost now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
$36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI, comme
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor,
Hindi,
$30 trillion kakarjo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Sekali radikali.
Japanese,
4 兆ドル以上も
Portuguese,
por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select a language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. Firstpost.